Hey, Giants fans, this is Chris Franklin from NJ Advanced Media, and welcome to the Talk is Cheap podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the New York Giants. Before we begin, I want to remind you that you can read our content on NJ.com/Giants and make sure to bookmark that to get the latest Giants news and analysis. Well, I don't know whether to call this Talk is Cheap or the Autopsy Show, because after watching the Giants struggle on Sunday against the Minnesota Vikings in that 28-6 loss, it's gonna be kind of tough to. It's a little tough if you're around the Giants facility this week to put that behind them. But we're gonna get into that today with our Talk is Cheap co-host Darryl Slater. Darryl, how are you doing today?
Hey, Chris, man, how you doing? Good to always be here with you as always. Yeah, obviously a brutal week one for the Giants, and I'm sure we'll get into the nitty gritty of it all.
Nice, yeah, here we go. Yeah, and when you look at this, it's tough to. I'm going to start with this. Where does this rank in the loss? This opening week one loss, as long as you've been covering a team, where does this rank among them?
Well, the lead to the story I wrote at the gun, well, at the end of the game, we call it the gun, but at the end of the game was, well, at least it wasn't 40-0. So it wasn't as bad as last year's week one loss at home to Dallas. And that was the Giants' worst home loss since 1943. So it was always going to be pretty hard to top, or I don't even know if top, bottom, is that even a word for that situation, to be worse than that one. But look, I mean, I don't know necessarily where it ranks per se, but the slow starts have become a thing for the Giants in recent years. Obviously in 2022, when they had a magical year in Brian Daboll's first year, they won their opener in Tennessee. This was a brutal loss for many reasons. Obviously coming off 6-11, they wanted to kind of get that taste out of their mouths. They lost again by 28-6, didn't score a touchdown, and they lost to Sam Darnold and the Vikings, a team that's not expected, unlike last year's Cowboys, to go anywhere. So a winnable game. They lost it in horrific fashion. The game was over, with 3 minutes into the third quarter, with 12 minutes left in the third quarter, basically. John Mara had gone on the radio on Friday, and he had said, look, yeah, I do feel pressure for this to be I'm paraphrasing him, a better result than last year's week one, because he felt like that set a bad tone for the season. And what happened? They went out and laid an egg on the celebration day for their 100th season with a lot of Giants legends. Well, almost the top 100 Giants legends in attendance: Lawrence Taylor, Harry Carson. And I saw Carl Banks go on his podcast thing where he said that at halftime, Lawrence Taylor said to him, and he caveated this by saying, Lawrence Taylor does not watch a lot of games. And okay, so he's fairly disconnected from football or whatever. But, in this particular game, it stood out to him so much how bad the Giants were that he was saying to Carl Banks, we could put 22 of us together, the old guys who were there at the game, out there and perform better than this. What an indictment of just a terrible all-around performance by the Giants.
It really was bad. And we're going to start with the top down, looking at the head coaching of Brian Daboll. I mean, it's pretty bad when you have a loss like that in that manner. It comes with preparation. And even when you look at Kevin O'Connell, he even said it, I'm paraphrasing here, that he was saying we look like they look more prepared. They look better conditioned. And that's kind of, when you look at Brian Daboll, you're like, shouldn't you be this, especially week one? We all know that he's under a lot of stress right now, and he's under the microscope, especially to keep his job under this year. Not a great start in terms of that one. Where does he even start? Like, where did he go wrong to get this to begin the season?
Well, the team looked wholly unprepared. But I think even worse, there were some moments where you think about the back-to-back quarterback keepers by Daniel Jones, where the play calling was just curious at best. And then, you know what? Like, we could sit here and watch the film and all that stuff. And yes, Daniel Jones did have some terrible throws. And yes, there were some drops. The offensive line on a whole wasn't horrific. But yeah, so there were certainly execution shortcomings. They lost the game by 22 points, a winnable game, and they had 2 field goals. That's all you need to know about whether his play calling went well, in week one. It didn't. It was terrible. We could sit here and do revisionist history and X's and O's and all that. But this is week one of a season in which he's putting all the pressure on himself by basically, stuffing Mike Kafka into a broom closet and taking on the full scope of play calling from the get-go, and they don't get into the end zone. And they were the only team in week one across the entire league this year, this week, right, obviously, that did not crack double digits in points. So, oh, by the way, Saquon Barkley has 3 touchdowns this year, and the Giants as a team have 0. So you don't think you think John Mayer is aware of that? He's definitely aware of that.
especially when all things we watching the Hard Knocks series saying you need to put weapons around your $40 million quarterback. Well, you gave him $40 million. What happened there? And this is the output he got from them. Now, speaking of that $40 million quarterback, Daniel Jones, there's a video out there of him being booed walking out of the stadium after that performance in terms of that. I'll start with that and aspect first. Do you think it was fair for him to be booed coming out of that stadium?
Well, no, of course not. I mean, those fans were idiots. I mean, so it was a few people, right? I mean, it wasn't like a mob of people throwing rotten tomatoes at him. So there's that. There was a few idiots who, yes, you do that, you're an idiot, period. You're a fool. And it's not an appropriate thing to do. But that said, I think there's been a lot of white knighting and pearl clutching on social media about it. Calm down, people. Okay. Just take a step back and calm down. All right. It wasn't that big of a deal. So yes, I think it can be both things, right? It can be inappropriate, but also not the end of the world. He was booed throughout the game. I mean, and the offense, and by the end, you could argue the whole team was being booed. And we'll get to the Dexter Lawrence stuff, I'm sure. But so the first boos came before the third play when they had to delay a game, or was it a too many men? I think it was delay a game. So people are fed up with this. They're fed up with the product. Okay, so you look at the Giants from 2014 to 2023. If you take out the 2 fluke, and yes, they were fluke, playoff seasons, the team was 40-90 in those other seasons. So when they've been bad, they've been really bad, and fans have sat through a lot of this garbage, and they're sick of it. And they're sick of it from this quarterback who, yes, okay, his year was shortened by injuries last year, the neck, and then more notably the torn ACL. But they just watched an offseason in which their brass broadcast to the entire world their desire to divorce this guy. And we knew it at the draft. We didn't need Hard Knocks to tell us they wanted to trade up for Drake May. I mean, it was being widely reported that that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to trade up for Drake May. They were done with Daniel Jones. Problem is, Tommy DeVito ultimately wound up setting this organization back however many years because they closed 4-3. Not just him. I mean, their defense played well. But after 2-8, they were right there. All they had to do was keep losing. So look, if you're a pragmatic Giants fan, okay, they're 1-0. So you can't sit here and say, oh, I hope they go 0-17. I mean, that's a bit extreme. But if they lose in Washington, they got a 6-game gauntlet ahead after that. If the losses start to pile up, if you're a pragmatic Giants fan, here's what you should be rooting for. Forget booing Daniel Jones. Root for the team to lose every single game the rest of the way. Period. That's what you should be rooting for if you really think Carson Beck is going to be your guy, or maybe Shedeur Sanders. I don't know if the Giants will put up with Deion's stuff. So, yes. So I think it's just an accumulation of people being really fed up with Daniel Jones. Obviously, what happened after the game was inappropriate. And so, no, he didn't deserve to be booed on his way out. And he handled it as you'd expect. He kept his head down and kept walking. And so I think he gets credit for being a pro and how he's handled things. But okay, who cares at this point? It's about performing. And he's not going to be the quarterback next year. It's over. Okay, it's over. The only question becomes, when do they bench him? They're not going to put him in bubble wrap. If he's healthy and reasonably productive, and they got their heads above water, or they're within contention, they're not putting him on the bench. He would need to perform. He would need to perform basically as poorly as he performed on Sunday. He'd need to keep doing that, and then he will be benched on merit. It was the 3rd lowest quarterback rating of his entire career, a career that, as we know, has been underwhelming so far.
Yeah, and it actually, you mentioned Dexter Lawrence, and that's what I was going to do the lead-in for that. And this is the quote that he had after that game. I don't respect, in regards to the booing, I don't respect it, honestly. I get it. They want to see their team win. It's just a rough patch. It is what it is. Now, being from where I'm from, then a little bit further south than you guys live there. Yeah, I wouldn't sit well on there. How are they taking it up in New York? Was it warranted? And is Dexter Lawrence is he going to face a lot of blowback because of that quote? You think?
I mean, well, let people know. I mean, you obviously are around the Eagles all the time, so you're around the people who are the Mozart of booing, basically. That's they work in that like Monet worked in watercolors. I mean, so look, this is not the first time the Giants. You go back 3 years. By the way, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, good pals, both really solid, really good players. Dexter Lawrence, great player. 3 years ago, Leonard Williams said basically the same thing. He said basically the same thing. So this is not the first time fans have booed. This is not the first time a player has cracked back on fans booing. I think Dexter Lawrence perhaps will get a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt because he's he's one of the two good players in the entire team. Two really good players. It's him and Andrew Thomas, who both, by the way, were drafted by Dave Gettleman. Yeah, he'll get blowback, I'm sure. It wasn't an Evan Neal type lashing out at the fan quote. It wasn't great. It was a terrible look. Let's just call it what it is. And it was also a terrible look for, and I'm happy I want any player to speak their mind, right? So I tell the truth, right? Reveal your emotions, right? But also it can be that. And also you can look at it objectively and say, that was kind of a dumb thing to say or a silly thing to say or whatever, like Adoree Jackson ripping the official after the game. Okay, fine. I'm happy to stand there and get those quotes and I'm happy to embrace honesty from a player. But you can also look at it from the perspective of the optics of that are just terrible. And it's not even just the optics of what Dexter Lawrence said. It's the content of what he said was just so off base. Look, most players probably feel that way in the locker room, right? They're annoyed that fans are booing. But guess what? Fans are showing up and paying a ton of money to go to these games. And the product on the field is abysmal. What do you expect? This is not the first time in the history of sports someone has gone boo like that. Okay, it's a widely accepted and widely done thing to express displeasure in a sports setting. How long has booing been around? 100 years? I mean, come on. It's like you're on the field. What's that sound? What's that? Oh my goodness! It's more like it's a silly pearl clutching. Give me a break. Come on. All right, Dexter Lawrence played pretty well in the game, so I can maybe from his perspective I can understand, but you got to look at it from a global perspective and say, people are sick of this. They won 6 games last year. So in the 12 seasons since, I probably know this off the top of my head now, since they won their last Super Bowl, 2 of those seasons they made the playoffs. One of those seasons they won 9 games. One of those seasons they won 7 games. In the other 8 seasons, they won 6 games or fewer. Okay, so it's not just that they've been bad; they've been really bad. And I gave you the 40 and 90 stat earlier. So yeah, that's what I make of it. I think the bottom line is go win in Washington, and everyone kind of exhales and resets. Lose in Washington to a quarterback you could have had if you had kept losing last year, when you had nothing to gain by accumulating meaningless wins with a mascot quarterback. Yeah. And then it's big time speculation about a full reset.
Heading into this morning, I was really looking forward to ask you these questions and everything, and you didn't disappoint. I was fired. You did not disappoint whatsoever. So thank you very, very much for that.
Happy to entertain you, Chris, as always.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, looking at other aspects of the offense, I thought it was interesting, especially the rookie Malik Nabers, 5 catches, 66 yards. However, he was out-targeted by Wan'Dale Robinson, 6 catches, 44 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson had 12 targets, Malik Nabers 7. Do you think it's something concerning going forward, or why do you think that he got out-targeted in terms of that?
Yeah, the quarterback play wasn't good. The line play was average at best. Nabers had 2 catches for 29 yards when the game was still a game. I'm talking about, if you look at the stats right after the Vikings went up 21-3. Okay, it's game over. Everything after that is lipstick on a pig, So, right, that was 12:08 left in the third quarter. They went up 21-3, and he had 2 catches for 29 yards at that point. He looked like he was getting open. He played pretty well. After the game, he was professional and everything. I think Malik Nabers is the least of their concerns right now, or one of the least. He's way down the list. So I think he was fine. Wan'Dale Robinson also, fine. They have a lot bigger issues on both sides of the ball than those two guys. So something, I guess, to build on for Malik Nabers. It was not an awesome debut, not a bad debut. It was just one of those kind of just right in the middle, which is fine.
Yeah, he's going to have a really good career, and he should do well, even if the quarterback we don't know who the quarterback is going to be next year, because he's definitely not on the roster right now. But switching to the other side of the ball, when you look at this, we heard so much about. We were looking forward to the impact that Brian Burns was going to make. We were going to look at Kayvon Thibodeau, the effect that was going to have off of that. Well, the only person that had a sack in that game for the Giants was Dexter Lawrence, and that was just the one. What do you think that the Vikings did to make it effective? And we know this is a copycat league. How does Shane Bowen put Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau in a position to counteract that and start to rack up the sack totals?
Yeah, Brian Dable was saying that he felt like some of the scheme stuff they did, the stunts and games or whatever, to use the technical terms, were good. And so basically what he's probably saying by that is like, the players need to play better. Okay, well, that's kind of a standard line from coaches, certainly, especially ones who are under pressure. But the storyline that really entering last year and entering this year has been, can anyone besides Dexter Lawrence get pressure, right? So if you go by PFF pressures, Dexter Lawrence had 6 in that game. Again, the guy is unbelievable. He's like on his way to Canton, I think. Right? He had a pass rush grade from PFF of 92.3. The next highest one was DJ Davidson, who played 9 pass rush snaps, so he hardly counts. He did have 2 pressures and a 73.7 grade. Okay, so 6 pressures for Lawrence, 2 for DJ Davidson. Good batting average, but he's not an every down player. Kayvon Thibodeau in 22 pass rush snaps, 1 pressure. Brian Burns in 20 pass rush snaps, 1 pressure. Okay, that's a 48.1 grade for Thibodeau, a 57.6 grade for Burns. The reality with Burns is he needed to perform near TJ Watt level to justify the Giants giving up a borderline first-round pick, 39th overall, which they could have used on a number 2 corner. They wanted to use on Kamari Lassiter. They were not able to do that. And they paid him an enormous amount of money. The bottom line on the contract, I think, is essentially $90 million over 3 years. A huge commitment financially. And you could argue an even bigger commitment with what they gave up in the draft at the 39th overall pick. So a very disappointing debut for those two guys. Granted, right. So like the Vikings were playing with a lead, right? So when you do that, obviously it's simple football stuff. Obviously, when you're playing with a lead, you don't have to throw the ball as much. So just looking at, he played Thibodeau 41 snaps in the game. 22 of those are pass rush snaps. Okay, so that tells you, okay, the Vikings did throw the ball a decent amount, but they didn't have to drop back and sit back and have Sam Darnold sit back there and throw the ball to catch up in the game. So it goes hand in hand. I do understand that, but the knock on Thibodeau coming into this year was, and just set Burns aside for a minute, but just the knock on Thibodeau coming into this year was, could he be a more efficient pass rusher? So yeah, he had those, what was it last year? I think 11 and a half sacks last year. But PFF, and again, they do a pretty good job. He rated really poorly. Like not necessarily poorly, but he had a 62.9 pass rush grade. And so what that's saying is he wasn't particularly, efficient. He had 43 pressures and 520 pass rush snaps last year. He did have, PFF has him for 13 sacks. So wasn't efficient enough. Okay, big year. I mean, this is a year where he can cash in. He just has not yet taken that next step. Again, 1 week, but pretty disappointing start for him. He goes to Washington next week, where he did have 2 years ago. Certainly the most electric game of his career, as everyone will remember, the game that basically put the Giants on the brink of clinching a playoff spot. And so maybe that ignites him a little bit.
Yeah, and you're hoping so, because you look at the assets you gave up, you look at all the stuff that you have there, you're going to need your defense to at least keep you in the games if they want to be competitive, and that wasn't it at all when you look at that.
No, I mean, their secondary was Swiss cheese. Sam Darnold in that game, I think I heard Kevin O'Connell say after the game that he started 12 of 12. I had him down starting 10 of 10. The final stats are kind of immaterial because at a certain point they didn't need to like keep playing anymore. But anyway, he was 19 and 24 for 208, 2 touchdowns. He did have a fairly meaningless pick, but he had 113.2 quarterback rating. He picked our secondary apart. He picked them apart. Okay, that's the bottom line with how this secondary played. And you look at you talk about guys who they needed to take the next step this year. Okay, so Joe Shane drafted, and I can probably do it off the top of my head, his first and second round picks in his first 2 drafts. Kayvon Thibodeau, disappointing debut. Evan Neal, not even on the field because he's a bust. The second round pick in 2022, it's escaping me because I just have a terrible memory because I have to look everything up. But I will get it as I'm talking here. Wan'Dale Robinson, obviously, who was solid. Okay. Then last year he picked Deonte Banks in the first round, John Michael Schmitz in the second round. All right. Well, let's look at it, right? We went through Thibodeau. We went through Neal. We talked about Robinson. Deonte Banks, who was tasked with covering Justin Jefferson, wound up with a 47.5 quarterback or a coverage grade. So not great. I mean, that's typical of what he had in an uneven rookie year. He had a very uneven rookie year. And if you look at what John Michael Schmitz did, again, a pretty typical performance based on what we saw last year, a 52.2 pass block rate. Not abysmal, but not good enough for a second round pick. Just like Banks there, not good enough for a first round pick. So that's where the Giants are at. Again, one game, but their secondary cannot let Jaden Daniels, of all quarterbacks, pick them apart next week.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you this as well too, especially when you look at the Commanders, the new head coach Dan Quinn, new offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. 2 of those wide receivers they had last year are gone. Look at Curtis Samuel; he's no longer there. Jahan Dotson, he's no longer there. Now you have Luke McCaffrey, the rookie, Olamide Zaccheaus, who was the 4th wide receiver in the Eagles last year. When you look at the setup they have, given that you have a rookie quarterback, you don't have to face in my opinion, as of right now, as much of a talented wide receiver core as much. Do you think this is a get-right game for his Giants defense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It better be because, again, you mentioned the rookie quarterback. You mentioned the weapons. Terry McLaurin, by the way, in week 1, 2 catches, 17 yards, no touchdowns. You're talking about a guy who's had 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons, who was a Pro Bowler in 2022. Pretty darn good receiver. Look, the Giants would kill for a receiver who had 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons, including 2 of those. He cracked 1,100 yards. And in 2022, he was darn near 1,200. And remember last year, Deonte Banks, who's from down that area in Maryland, went to Maryland from the outside of Baltimore. He in the game in Washington last year, that was the Tommy DeVito first win, and that's the game where anyone with a shred of common sense should have looked at it after the game and said, "Okay, great, they won the game, great for Tommy DeVito, but this is not good for their draft position," and it wasn't. But McLaurin in that game didn't play well. I'll call up the numbers here, but Banks performed well against him, and that was the game where afterwards, Banks. And doing something the Giants obviously do not want their players to do. But he gets on his, Instagram Live, and he just eviscerates in a very calm tone of voice Terry McLaurin. And the comedic, if you haven't seen it, go watch the video. It's there's nothing. I don't know. Maybe there's like one profanity in there, but it's not that bad. It's not like personal shit. He's very good comedic timing in that video. He says, "I just want to know." Where was 17 today? Or I guess he's number 17, right? I didn't see him out there. Did he play? It was the sarcasm was beautiful. I mean, if you appreciate comedy sarcasm, it was beautiful. Where was he? Was he in the game? And just a straight face. Amazing. Terrific. And so McLaurin in that game, 7 targets, 5 catches, 43 yards, no touchdowns, while playing 80% of the snaps. And the Giants won the game 31-19. Yeah, so that'll be an awesome matchup to see again, just because of, if only because of that amazing video. He apologized last year. That was one of those where the player apologized and the PR guy's got a steak knife in the small of his back while he's while he's doing the thing. And I wanted to tell him, like, no one here cares. It doesn't matter. And you apologize. No one is offended by it. It wasn't that big of a deal. I think the pro wrestling part of the NFL is cool. That's why, like, okay, Dexter Lawrence said what he said or whatever. The players booed Jones. Okay, come on, like that's fine. Now there are certain parts of it where we get into the absurdity of things, like where it's like, okay, that's a bit much, but that wasn't the case. So the Banks McLaurin matchup will be fun. I think it'll be super fun to watch, and they have to take him away, obviously.
Yeah, very much so. And before we get to a couple of over-unders, I'm going to ask you about, when we look at this matchup, it's pretty much the loser is going to be in the bottom of the NFC East and could be for a very long time, given what they are. Without giving a prediction, I know it's still very early in the season. Do you think the Giants avoid being in the cellar to start out the season?
Like, do I think they'll win the game? Yeah, I think they'll win the game. I think it'll be a close game. I don't know. I guess I could just make up a score right now. I mean, close, low-scoring game. I expected this game this past week to be kind of a rock fight, low-scoring game. I don't know. I mean, 17-14 or something like that, or 21-20. Yeah, I think the Giants win. It'll be close. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose, considering how badly they played. Their roster is bad. But Washington's pretty darn bad too. I saw, just seeing a Dan Quinn quote in it right now, talking about Jaden Daniels, who ran a bunch in the opener, and basically saying that's not really what we're looking for. I mean, it sounds familiar to the Daniel Jones storyline, right, from early in his career. It's like, stop running so much and exposing yourself to getting hit. And if you look at Daniels in that game, geez, wow, oh my goodness. But he ran 16 times, and he ran for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. Okay. Yeah. So long as 17. That's a lot of running, but also, a pretty decent production there, I guess. So you can understand still, nonetheless, why Dan Quinn would say that. So it's on the job. I mean, you're obviously not going to go into a game trying to hurt a player. But if Jaden Daniels exposes himself that much, that's something that the Giants are going to have to take advantage of in terms of, within the rules, is certainly of putting a few licks on him.
Well, I used to have a coach, Coach Ski. He used to say it always best a lot early on. Now, right now, I was on the offside of the ball, but I heard this. I'm like, kind of make me nervous after this. He used to always say, sometimes it's good to take a 15 just to let the quarterback know you're there. And if that happens, maybe he starts slide. Maybe you just take a little bit one just to establish a thing, not in the fourth quarter or something of consequence, but maybe first quarter, first 5-10 minutes, just to say, hey, you know what? Hey, we're here. We're not going to let you run around and have your way with us. So, hey, who knows? Maybe they take that strategy and go back to the ones in terms of that. Now, finally, we'll do a couple over-unders in terms of this. And I'll do one offensive and one defensive. All right, Darryl, what do you think? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers put up 392 yards on the Commanders. I'll give you this. I don't expect the Giants to go anywhere near that number. I'm going to say, given off this past performance, 255 total yards, over or under for the Giants offense.
Yeah, I mean, they had 240 in the opener on 68 plays. Wow. They had 17 more plays than the Vikings in that game, and they had the ball for basically 5 more minutes. Wow. I think they will go over 255. It's a pretty low bar to clear, man.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's the way after watching that game on Sunday, watching the replays and everything else, I'm starting to say, like, how do they move the ball? And I'm like, even if it's Commanders, it's a division game too. I think, yes, to answer your question in short, I think they'd go over it. And just for context, I mean, their offense was really bad last year. They had, I'll count the games that they had here where they had fewer than 255. 1, 2, 7 games, right? Did I get that? 7 games with 255 or fewer. The peak of that being 248. And the lowest being 150. So it's certainly possible they go under 255. I mean, they did in the opener. They did it 7 times last year. And they also had a 268 game, a 277 game. I'll take the over, though. Cool. And finally, the Giants defense will hold Jaden Daniels to a lower quarterback rating. And I mean, like the old school quarterback rating, 158.3 type rating, than opposed to Daniel Jones.
Oh, okay. So who will have a lower quarterback rating?
Yep. Do you think they'll be able to hold? Do you think the Giants defense will be able to hold Jaden Daniels to a lower quarterback rating than whatever Daniel Jones has in the game?
Right. So excuse me. Darnold had a 113.2, and then in the opener, and Jones had a 44.3. So I think a lot of that too was just Jones. And you hear a lot like where offenses say like, it was on us or whatever. I mean, he had some horrible throws that were like, to use a tennis term, like just unforced errors. Who will have a lower quarterback rating? I guess I'm being like oddly optimistic about the Giants, but I think it will be close. I think neither guy will light it up, but I think they'll both be below 100. But I think Jones will have a slightly better quarterback rating there. So I don't know. So probably go ahead and bet the opposite of whatever I said.
I was going to say the way they're playing right now, I think they're going to throw. If Daniel Jones keeps throwing those picks, good luck. I think Jaden Daniels might come away with it. It's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be great football. I think we're going to look at the version. We know when we're talking about the 100 years of the Giants. I think we'll see the 1940s and 50s quarterbacks rating versions, and this game's over, as opposed to what we see with the modern offenses. But
I mean, that's sort of how the Giants have won last year when they won. They won ugly, and look. Fans are not going to be picky. They just win games, and that's probably how this team is going to have to win. We said it like from the get-go. They're going to have to lean on their defense because they have one really feared offensive weapon, and the kid has now played one game in the NFL. And they're going to have to lean on not only their defense, but their secondary being so green. Yes, Deonte Banks is going to have to make some plays at some point, but they're going to have to lean on the guys who are supposed to be their best players. Their pass rush, Dexter Lawrence, who played great in the opener, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, who did not. So they need to get home with a pass rush while playing a lot of zone coverage. It's not hard to figure out. And so didn't happen in week one. Let's see if they can rattle a rookie quarterback in his second game. You think they should be able to do that in a not exactly super challenging road environment. So, that I think that's winning ugly is fine for this team and this fan base. That's how they're going to have to do it. And I think they will. I think they'll win a close ugly game. Now, all the 6 games, again, they started 1-1 last year. It was like they quote unquote saved their season with the epic comeback in Arizona last year. They beat a terrible team. They pretty much only beat terrible teams last year, but except the Packers, But then they wound up starting 1-5 and 2-8, and then 2-8. So okay, so if they win the game, let's take a pause on declaring the season, relevant again. It could still certainly go way off the rails, but if you do start 0-2, that is entering complete disaster territory as you look at the gauntlet ahead after that, which is at Cleveland in week 3. Then they host on a short week Thursday night game. They host the Cowboys. There's no way they're winning either of those games. Then they go to Seattle. They host the Bengals. They host the Eagles, and they go to the Steelers to close out October. So as we're sitting here at the 8-game mark at the end of October, what will this team's record be? Well, if they lose in Washington, don't be surprised if their record's 1-7 or 0-8, and then there's a lot of consequences that could come with that. Anyway, so 6-game gauntlet that follows this game. Certainly a must win. I think they will win. I think they'll win this game.
Hey, who knows? It's the way Deshaun Watson's playing after he played against that Cowboy team. That might be they might actually have a shot. Who knew?
Right. So it's easy to sit here and say 6-game gauntlet. All these teams are better than the Giants because look, no one's expecting really anything from the Giants. They have one of the lowest expectations of anyone in the league, certainly after week 1. But you can't necessarily crazy things happen in the NFL. Like you look at the games they're probably not winning. They're probably not beating the Eagles. They're probably not beating the Cowboys. Maybe I don't think they go to Cleveland and win, but like you said, the Browns look terrible in week 1. And I don't think the Bengals will lose to the Giants in East Rutherford on a Sunday night. But look, the Bengals didn't look great either. So there's mitigating factors there for them, of course, with Chase and Higgins. But so again, they can only take it 1 week at a time or whatever it is. And they have to. I mean, they have to win this game. I think they'll find a way to do it.
Well, Darryl, thank you very much for being on here. Avoid any burst pipes if you're down there at the stadium when you're down there with us at FedEx. I know Old Facts not no longer FedEx, but in Landover because that's one of the best stadiums in the league. No, but yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Make sure to check out Darryl and Ryan Novozinski's work on NJ.com/Giants. They'll have all the stuff leading up to the game and even post game as well, too. You get to read the instant reactions and analysis from the game versus the Commanders. So for Darryl, I'm Chris. Everybody have a good one. See ya.